This code is too complex for you. They doubted the gray-haired programmer, who solved IT while they slept. He arrived at the tech startup with worn shoes and asked to solve the code in exchange for a meal. Everyone laughed, called him crazy until he placed his fingers on the keyboard and showed them who he really was. The sun beat down on the glass building when Marcus approached the entrance of Code Vision Solutions. His clothes were weathered, his hair graying and unkempt, and the smell of someone living in their car clung to him like an invisible mark. But his eyes, despite being tired, held a different brightness, a brightness that no one there knew how to recognize. James was hunched over his workstation, sweating and cursing under his breath. Beside him, two other developers, Sarah and Kevin, watched him work, trying desperately to offer suggestions. The company's lead investor, Patricia, stood leaning against the wall with arms crossed, clearly anxious but trying hard to maintain composure. "I can't believe this is happening," she muttered, running her hand through her hair repeatedly. "We need this system deployed today or everything falls apart." James lifted his head, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "I don't know what's wrong anymore. The error keeps cascading through the entire architecture like a virus. If we don't fix this by tonight, the whole project collapses and we lose the biggest contract of the year," he said, frustration etched into every word. His voice cracked slightly with stress. Sarah added, "The client is expecting the demo tomorrow morning. If we delay this, they're pulling out. They've already invested millions, and they're not going to wait around for us to figure out basic debugging." Kevin was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. 3 days. We've been looking at this code for 3 days straight. I've checked every module, every function, every possible connection point. Nothing makes sense. The logic is sound, but the system just keeps failing. Patricia looked at her watch for the 100th time. That's 22 hours from now. 22 hours to fix something that might take weeks to unravel properly. It was then that Marcus stepped forward slowly. His presence seemed to make the air stand still for a moment. Everyone turned to look at him, taking in his appearance with obvious disdain. Patricia wrinkled her nose slightly, instinctively stepping back. Sarah's expression changed to one of confusion mixed with disgust. "Can I help?" Marcus asked, his voice calm and steady, with no hesitation in his tone. Sarah let out a laugh that sounded more like a scoff, a harsh bark that echoed through the office space. "Help? Look at you, old man. Do you even know what a database is? Have you ever used a modern programming language? This isn't the 1980s anymore." She exchanged knowing glances with Kevin, who smirked in response and shook his head dismissively. Kevin added, "Yeah, I'm sure you've got some amazing insight for us. Why don't you go find the nearest soup kitchen instead of wasting our time?" James shook his head slowly, though with noticeably less malice than the others. "Sir, this is enterprise-level architecture we're dealing with here. We're looking at distributed systems, microservices integration, and legacy code conflicts that span multiple platforms. This isn't something you just walk up to and solve in 10 minutes because you think you know." Computers. Patricia folded her arms tighter. "Security shouldn't have let you pass the front desk. How did you even get up here?" But Marcus didn't react to their dismissal or their cruelty. He simply looked at the screens with intense concentration, studying the code for what seemed like an eternity. Lines of red errors and broken connections filled multiple monitors in front of him. The problem had been haunting this team relentlessly for 3 long days and 3 longer nights. "May I?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the keyboard with surprising politeness. "Go ahead and waste your time," Kevin muttered, turning away completely. "We'll be here when you fail like everyone else does." Patricia started to speak, preparing to have security remove him, but something in Marcus's bearing stopped her mid-sentence. Maybe it was the way he carried himself despite his poverty, or the certainty in his movements despite their mockery. She nodded slightly, giving him permission more out of curiosity than hope. Marcus sat down at the workstation slowly, taking in the entire setup. His weathered fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising grace and speed, despite their worn appearance. Lines of code scrolled up the screen rapidly, his eyes tracking everything with intense focus. He didn't type frantically like James had been doing for hours. Instead, each keystroke seemed deliberate and purposeful, like someone who knew exactly where he was going and why. He opened files, examined dependencies, traced data flows through multiple services. His movements were methodical. He pulled up system logs going back days, scanning through them at a speed that seemed impossible. He wrote small test functions, ran them, examined the results. All the while, the office remained completely silent. 20 minutes passed with no one speaking except for the soft clicking of keys. 30 minutes. 40. Sarah had stopped mocking and was watching with grudging attention. Kevin had returned to the desk, standing silently. James was leaning over Marcus's shoulder now, trying to follow the logic of what he was doing. "Wait," James said suddenly. "You're checking the timestamp conversion in the middleware layer. I didn't even think about that. We assumed the problem was in the core service logic." "Most people do," Marcus said without looking away from the screen. "When you're too close to a problem, you see it as a whole object instead of as individual components. You need distance sometimes. Perspective." He typed a few more lines, implemented what looked like a simple function, and then executed a comprehensive system test. The red errors that had been filling the screens began to disappear. One by one, the failures resolved. The cascading problems stopped cascading. "There," Marcus said finally, leaning back and removing his hands from the keyboard. "The problem wasn't in the code itself, as you suspected. It was in the way the microservices were communicating with each other. The legacy system was sending timestamps in a different format than the new architecture expected. One simple conversion function in the middleware layer, and everything aligns perfectly." James's eyes widened as he studied what Marcus had written on the screen. He ran a test, then another, then a full system diagnostic that would take several minutes. Every test passed. The errors that had been plaguing them for 3 days simply vanished completely. That's incredible," Sarah whispered, her skepticism crumbling like old paper. She moved closer to examine the code herself. Kevin stood frozen, his earlier smugness and arrogance completely gone. He looked embarrassed now, ashamed of how he had treated this stranger. Patricia moved closer to the screen, examining the solution with fresh eyes. Her expression shifted gradually from doubt to something approaching awe. "How did you see that so quickly? We've been staring at this code for 3 days straight. We have PhDs on this team. We have people with 20 years of experience. How is it possible that you found this in less than an hour?" Marcus stood up slowly, stepping away from the desk and stretching his back. "Sometimes when you've spent enough time in a system, you understand not just what it does, but why it does it. Experience isn't about your appearance or where you sleep at night. It's about what you've learned through years and what you've overcome through struggle." James rose from his chair and extended his hand formally. "I'm sorry we treated you that way. I'm truly sorry. What's your name? I need to know who you are." "Marcus," he replied, shaking James's hand firmly with surprising strength. "Marcus Chun. I'm James Rodriguez. That solution you provided, it's elegant. It's efficient. I've never seen someone approach a problem like that before. It's like you could see through the noise to the actual issue." Patricia stepped forward, her nervousness now replaced with something different, something like genuine respect mixed with curiosity. "How did you know so much about distributed systems?" "Most programmers your age, well, they don't usually stay current with modern architecture and frameworks. Most people either retire or fall behind." Marcus looked out the window at the city stretching below them, lights beginning to twinkle in the approaching evening. "I didn't just wake up here, Patricia. 30 years ago, I was in this building working in one of the corner offices. I was one of the first architects of distributed computing in this city, one of the pioneers of the field. Then life happened, as it does. Mistakes were made, terrible mistakes, some of them mine and some of them beyond my control. I lost everything, including my place in an industry I helped build from the ground up." The room seemed to absorb this information slowly, processing what he had just revealed. "But you never stopped learning," Kevin said quietly, genuine respect in his voice now. It wasn't a question anymore. "No," Marcus agreed, turning back to face them. "I couldn't stop. Even when I had nothing else left, I had my mind and my determination. I'd spent nights in libraries when they were open, internet cafes, anywhere I could access information and resources. The world kept changing around me, technology evolved constantly. But the fundamental principles remained the same underneath it all. You just have to remember that underneath all the new tools and frameworks and architectures, it's still about solving problems logically and systematically." James looked at the code on screen again with new understanding. "This is going to save the entire project completely. The client demo is tomorrow morning, and without this fix, we were going to have to delay everything by months. We would have lost credibility and probably lost the contract." "Where are you staying?" Patricia asked Marcus, though everyone could guess the answer from his appearance and the smell that clung to him. "Wherever I can find space," Marcus said simply and honestly. "Been working odd jobs, trying to get back on my feet slowly. I heard about the startup wars happening down here, and I thought maybe I could find some work in my field. I didn't expect to get past security, but I was persistent." Sarah, who had been quiet since the solution proved correct beyond any doubt, finally spoke again. "How did you make it up here?" "Security is pretty strict about who they let in. I told them I was looking for employment," Marcus said with a slight smile. "I told them I had experience in systems architecture. They seemed skeptical, but I was persistent and polite. Eventually, they let me come up and speak with someone. Patricia made a decision then. You could see it clearly in her eyes as it happened. Marcus, how would you feel about working here with us? Not as a consultant or temporary help. As a full-time senior architect, your name on the team officially. A real salary, benefits, and insurance. Somewhere stable to live that doesn't depend on luck. James looked surprised at the generous offer, though not negatively so. Even Sarah and Kevin, despite their earlier dismissal and cruelty, didn't object or argue. They had seen what Marcus could do with his own eyes. Marcus was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something internal. Why would you hire someone who walked in here looking like this? Why take a chance on me? Because, Patricia said firmly, I'd rather have someone who can think like you than 100 people who follow predictable patterns. And because I believe in giving second chances to people who clearly never stopped fighting, even when everything was against them and the odds seemed impossible. Over the next 3 months, Marcus transformed Code Vision Solutions from within. He wasn't just fixing code or optimizing systems. He was teaching, actively mentoring younger developers, showing them how to think differently about problems and approach them systematically. James became his closest collaborator and friend, learning not just the technical skills required, but also the philosophy and mindset behind them. Sarah and Kevin, initially skeptical and dismissive, became some of his most enthusiastic students and supporters. They began to understand that arrogance and dismissiveness had cost them 3 days of struggle. Marcus showed them that humility and openness to learning could solve impossible problems. The client demo went perfectly without any issues or complications. Not only did the system work flawlessly, but Marcus had also optimized it in ways that exceeded all expectations. The investor on the client side actually asked who the architect was, and when they learned about Marcus and his background, the story began to spread rapidly through industry circles. Articles started appearing in tech publications across the country. Gray-haired genius solves impossible code problem in 1 hour. Then it evolved into something bigger. From homeless to industry leader, the Marcus Chun story. The narrative captured people's imagination because it was real and authentic, because it wasn't about luck or circumstances aligning perfectly by chance. It was about someone who had refused to let the world define his limitations or his worth. But Marcus didn't let the attention go to his head or change who he was. Instead, he used it strategically. 6 months after starting at Code Vision, Marcus founded a nonprofit organization called Second Algorithm. The mission was clear and direct. Identify talented individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds who had been ignored completely by the traditional tech industry. People who, like him, had the skills and abilities but lacked the opportunity, the appearance, or the social capital that gatekeepers demanded before granting access. The organization didn't just provide jobs to people in need. It provided comprehensive mentorship, housing assistance, training in modern technologies, and most importantly, it provided dignity. It recognized that talent doesn't come in a particular demographic package, and that some of the best minds in any field might be overlooked simply because of circumstances beyond their control. The first cohort included 15 people carefully selected. A woman who had been living in a shelter but had taught herself machine learning through free online resources and late-night study. A man who had once been a talented network engineer but fell into addiction and homelessness and had finally gotten clean after years of struggle. A young person who had extraordinary skills in cybersecurity but had never had the chance to prove it in a professional setting due to lack of connections. James, Sarah, and Kevin all became mentors in the program without hesitation. The same people who had laughed at Marcus on that first day now understood the lesson he had lived. Judgment based on appearance is a luxury that blinds you to opportunity and potential. Patricia became one of the organization's biggest supporters and advocates. She invested not just money but her own time and energy, helping Marcus navigate the nonprofit landscape, connecting him with donors and other industry leaders who believed in the mission deeply. The real turning point came when one of Second Algorithm's first cohort members was recruited by one of the largest tech companies in the world. Then another followed. Then another after that. Within 2 years, the success rate of the organization's participants in finding meaningful employment far exceeded industry averages and statistics. Marcus continued working at Code Vision while running Second Algorithm as well. He was no longer the man in worn shoes seeking a meal to survive. He had an apartment of his own, a respectable salary, recognition in his field from peers. But more importantly, he had purpose again in life. He had agency and control over his destiny. He had proven that the story of his life wasn't over, that age and circumstance and past failures didn't have to define future possibility and potential. One evening, 2 years after that first day when he walked through the door, Marcus was back at CodeVision giving a talk to the entire company. He stood in front of the same workstations where he had typed that solution, surrounded by the people who had doubted him initially and the many new employees who had joined since that day. "I want to tell you something important," he said, his voice steady and clear. "The code we write, the systems we build, they're not just abstractions or intellectual exercises, they're reflections of our values as a society. And one of the most important values in technology should be this: believing in potential, even when it appears in unexpected packages and circumstances." He paused, looking directly at James, Sarah, and Kevin with warmth. "I walked in here as someone most of you would have dismissed immediately without hesitation. You had every social reason to do so based on how I looked. But you didn't throw me out completely. Most of you didn't. You gave me a chance, even if reluctantly and skeptically. That chance changed my life completely. And now, through Second Algorithm, we've given hundreds of people the same kind of chance to prove themselves. Some of those people are going to solve problems we haven't even thought of yet. Some are going to change this industry in ways we can't predict or imagine. Not because they're more talented than anyone else necessarily, but because they were given the opportunity to prove what they already knew about themselves deep down." The room was completely silent, every person listening intently. "The question isn't whether there's talent out there being wasted," Marcus continued with passion. "The question is whether we have the courage to look for it in places we're not used to looking, and whether we're willing to challenge our own assumptions about who belongs in this room and in this industry. Because I promise you, some of the best solutions to your hardest problems are waiting outside the door right now, wearing the wrong clothes, with the wrong background, with the wrong circumstances. They're just waiting for someone brave enough to believe in them and give them a chance." After his talk, people lined up for an hour to speak with him. Some wanted advice on their code and architecture. Others wanted to talk about the Second Algorithm program and how they could get involved. But the conversations that meant the most were with James, Sarah, and Kevin. "I owe you an apology," Sarah said sincerely. "I was cruel that day. I judged you without knowing anything about you or your background." "You were scared," Marcus said simply. "Your company was falling apart, the investor was nervous, and then a homeless man walked in claiming he could help. From your perspective at that moment, it was absurd and laughable. I'm not angry about that. I'm grateful you were willing to be proven wrong and learn from it." Kevin said, "I've been mentoring in Second Algorithm for 6 months now. I've learned more from those conversations than I learned in my entire computer science degree. It's strange and humbling how I realized my assumptions about ability and potential were so completely wrong." James just smiled and put his hand on Marcus's shoulder with affection. "Thank you. Thank you for showing up that day, for being patient with us when we didn't deserve it, for not letting our doubts stop you, and for creating something bigger than just fixing code or building systems." The sun was setting over the city as Marcus left the building that evening. Below, the lights of the city were flickering on individually. Thousands of workspaces where people were solving problems, building systems, creating the future. Some of them were probably overlooked talents, people whose circumstances didn't match their abilities. People who, like him, were waiting for a chance to show what they could do. He thought about the journey from that day when he walked in wearing worn shoes to this moment now. It wasn't a simple story of redemption, though it contained elements of that. It was a story about perspective and bias, about the cost of our assumptions, and about the untapped potential that exists when we're willing to look beyond the surface at what's really there. It was about second chances and second lives. It was about not giving up even when the world told you to. Tomorrow he would be back here, writing code, mentoring developers, making decisions about the future of the company and the lives it touched. But tonight he allowed himself to simply observe the city, grateful for a second chance, for people who had the courage to look past appearances, and for the knowledge that somewhere out there, someone else was about to get their chance too. The cycle would continue, and each person given a chance would give chances to others. That was the real code he had solved.